Michelle.
Daniel.
OG Rose.
And today we're going to attempt one of these outside
Yes.
during dinner with the children. We'll see how that goes.
Yay!
But today we thought I'd talk a little bit about belonging
Yes.
in a digital world, belonging online. Michelle's been thinking about that with a wonderful invitation from Philosophy Portal. And it's a very interesting topic. What does it mean to belong online? Is it possible? And things like that.
Yeah, I really appreciated the discussion and the opportunity. So yes, thanks to Cadell last and the Philosophy Portal. And I think that it's an interesting topic because, to the language you use of givens and releases, the thing is that a lot of what was just the shared setting for people would be the givens just in the background of everything that facilitates the sense of belonging or not, right? Because a lot of times belonging goes with the word here, right? I feel like I belong here, or I feel like I don't feel like I belong here.
Right.
What does here mean but the setting, right?
Right.
So if you don't have that setting, then that's shared by nature of the physical space, then you have to basically set up the shared setting, right?
Also, people also use there with it. It's like, I don't belong there, or I don't think that there is where I belong.
That's true.
It's like things like maybe in ways with belonging, it feels like I don't think I'll get a job there, or I don't know if there's where I want to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Sometimes they do use the word there, not just here.
Well, I mean, to your point, Haven, there is always a sense of location with belonging. You belong there, you belong somewhere else. And what's interesting is where is the digital located?
Exactly.
Like, where is it exactly? In a weird way, it's everywhere, but if it's everywhere, it's nowhere.
Yeah.
So where exactly are we situating ourselves in? And I think the point that you made on geography provides a setting, but online you have to set everything.
Mm-hmm.
And thus it's existential because you have to choose it and different things like that. And there's an argument to be made about that there's something to be said about not the book is going to talk about how you can deal with the problem by just getting over belonging, not needing it anymore, just get over it. And there are some amount of people that will be able to do that. The book will talk about delusions. Delusions accomplish that. But then the sociologist will ask, that's fine, but does that define the majority? So we always have to also ask the question individually or socially. Individually, you can deal with the problem of belonging by just becoming someone who doesn't need to deal with belonging and actually enjoys the lack of location and the disorganization and disorientation and so on and so forth.
But don't they belong there? That still have the word belong in it.
No,
so they know they belong somewhere, but there's nowhere that they don't belong. So there's technically their belonging is everywhere, but then it's nowhere because they can be anywhere. They're really flexible with things.
Well, that's what they would say. There is a sense, Haven, where what they're kind of would say is they can belong in not belonging. They can belong in, and some people can do that. So the question has to be divided into how does the individual deal with belonging again after the loss of sociological givens, and then the question of, well, can the society belong? Can the majority of people belong as delusions, right? Can the majority? But then this is the massive, massive, massive question. Bless you, Reed. The massive question of scale and spread that kind of defines belonging again. Can you spread, the conditions of the average person being delusion or absolute knowing or Nietzschean? You trying to feed the birds? Yeah, that's good.
There's a fly. We were using asparagus like a little sword.
Yeah. Well, asparagus was, hey, there you go. Asparagus belongs as a sword fighting flies. What is it, Ray? Stuff like that.
I belong making bread.
Yeah.
I am like the what? I am like a what?
Like a rock or a tree?
You gotta grow it from a seed.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, but I think too, to that point, there's just kind of a sense in which, well, in some ways we all have to sort of just deal with it as it is, right?
Sure.
But there can be a sense in which the tensions that the digital versus the physical create are what we have to navigate, right?
Yes.
And I think that, like a point that I brought up is just the real tension of, I need to fold laundry, but I also, would like to have this philosophical conversation.
Yep.
And not because, I think, it's tricky with words like, an intellectual conversation. I don't really think about it in those terms, but there are people who are more open to talking about ideas, basically, or
Sure.
not, right? And you may not, the person who is down the road who could fold laundry with you, they might be able to just help in terms of just the quotidian company or whatever during your normal day-to-day tasks, but they may not be able to talk with you about ideas, and you might gravitate towards talking to your digital friends in the digital spaces because you're like, well, I really do like talking about ideas, but it's harder to do the juggling of talking on a screen, some conversation about some just pick something about the Lacanian's mirror stage or whatever,
Sure.
and fold versus just having the person sit with you.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of truth to the idea that part of the problem is that we haven't not belonged enough. Because, you have to do that to see the problem correctly, to really understand what needs to be done. There's a lot of people no, I have belonging at work. I have relationships with my community and different things. But, capitalism has done this thing where belonging is the corporation. Right. And if you don't begin to understand that that's not necessarily the same as belonging, or you could have that, but then if you lose your job, it turns out you don't hear from those people again. There are many ways in which, you actually do need to see the depths of the sociological problem to even begin thinking it anew. So there is some validity. Or a lot of people, in marriages or relationships, will kind of avoid the real, or someone will kind of back down for the more dominating personality in order to kind of avoid conflict. And there's a way in which, looking at that is too painful, and so they don't. But then if you don't, you can't actually have real fittedness or belonging there. So there is something to be said about, before you can even start the conversation, there is something about really needing to come to the place where you really feel that you don't belong, and you actually face those existential anxieties as opposed to kind of pressure, push them down,
right.
Suppress them, and things like that.
Yeah, no, I mean it's to the title. It's to the title of the book. We spoke about it a little bit on the release date of Belonging Again, but there's a big emphasis on the fact that it's belonging again, right?
Right.
It's not just to merely have kind of a thoughtless belonging, but to be able to face your feeling of not belonging, and
right.
then figure out how to create belonging in that not belonging.
Right.
But I think, a lot of people who are in the digital spaces, at least doing the sort of philosophical or creative work, they already they have sort of faced their own not belonging wherever they are, or whatever they're doing just doesn't. It's hard to find a place for it, or maybe have it do what you're hoping it will do, and so then you. It's not as if, I don't think it's kind of, I don't know how to put it. It's almost like it can seem like, well, I can't become a painter, so I'll just be a teacher of a painter. It's not like this sort of failed backup plan. I think there is something about it that's just genuinely a new avenue of connection, being a new technology and a new avenue for exploration and meeting new people, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that you could maybe be somebody who could actually be very, for lack of a better word, very successful with actual people in your geolocational place in terms of relationships. And it doesn't mean you just resort to the internet or resort to digital relationships. It's more like there's something that's uniquely offered there, or uniquely being able to be experienced there, that makes you develop relationships in that space. It's just it's kind of like the idea that you kind of can get sort of into the digital friendship realm for maybe multiple reasons. It could be that you're just it's not working out here, I'll just go escape into that. Not escape,
Sure.
But it could be a jettison into that because it at least offers something, and it really does offer something that a lot of people don't feel like they have at home, or
Sure.
where they are. And sometimes though, that sort of sense of experience of negativity is not always somebody's fault per se. They may also just have something happen that's quite catastrophic in their family, or that everything falls apart, and really there can be some real good in carrying on with life to find that sense of connection with others, even if they be abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if there's the question of individual belonging versus sociological belonging, well, the issue is that if you're going to get online and meet people, then you need workers to create the internet infrastructure to maintain the wires, and that means you have to have roads so they can drive there. There has to be places where they can eat to do their job, at lunch so they have the energy, and so on and so forth. So you need an entire economy to sustain the infrastructure for the possibility of those individual belongings. And that's where then, if the people who work and do the jobs and make possible the infrastructure, the socioeconomic infrastructure, don't have belonging, well then the problem of totalitarianism, breakdown of the social, all these things come roaring back. So, that issue of the question of spread is always lurking in the background. But when we talk about a given individual finding, say, belonging in the relation of the digital with the everyday life, there's a very real sense in which, and it's almost like you can go online to get your nourishment to sustain. Like if you're philosophically inclined, you can get your nourishment online that in the past you may have never gotten your nourishment, or the only way you may have gotten your philosophical nourishment or intellectual nourishment were to live at a college, but that has led to the kind of ivory tower class division between the people in colleges, and then it's very difficult to have tenure at a university or to be a PhD student or live at the college basically and not start to think that you know how to run the world. That gets into Thomas Sowell, the intellectual problem, and so on and so forth. But how else was you going to get your intellectual nourishment? So now there's a way, because of the internet, for the possibility, maybe a way to think about what's going on online for a lot of people is not so much community. And there's always an irony too. When your goal is community, then you don't get it. Community always feels to me like it has to be a secondary thing. We talked with Bernard about that. When you say we're going to get together and do community, then that's what you don't get, because irony is the fabric of reality.
Right.
Whereas if you get together and say, we're going to think together, or we're going to understand Hegel, then you look around and go, oh, look, community. That's interesting. Right. And that seems to also be what occurs, where these online spaces, you start getting relationships and bonds around a skill. And it's almost like a meal. It's kind of funny because, if I'm thinking Wendell Berry or different people, how community forms around meals, it's almost like what you're doing, in a way, is getting a kind of intellectual meal. And then it's kind of nourishing, and then that actually sustains you when you go through, say, your everyday life. And then it actually can make it more alive as you go through your everyday life. So it's interesting how the brain sees it as an either-or. The other thing, too, it's not it's one of the advantages of the internet is it's very you can jump on when you're available at times you're available. It's much more spatial, locally open and free to get into when it works for you. Right. And otherwise, before the internet, since that that all speaks to a certain coordination problem, well, the thing that overcame the coordination problem of your free time was just TV. People would just watch TV or watch sports, and so that's interesting as well, where today you have a possibility of intellectualism that doesn't have as much of a coordination problem. Yeah. Because in the past, you would have to go live around a college campus or go to the local philosophy book club at the library on Tuesday nights. But now it's much more open and you can live coordinate it with Zoom chat. So I think maybe in the past, there was more of an either or to it. Whereas today, the either-or is much less because the logistical challenges are lesser. That may change things.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I talked about maybe, sure, I can't really exchange banana bread with somebody, but we can share a type of communication that ends up being the communion, as in the thing you actually take part in and take, it's like breaking the bread and drinking the wine. There's something very, you may not be able to do it with physical bread, right? But you can do it with the words that are kind of a type of sustenance, or it's a kind of thing that you can consume together, and you do sort of partake in it. Now it's almost like the words become the bread, Right. And it is a really beautiful thing. It is very nourishing to the soul, so that it is like a type of exchange of or a shared meal or whatever. Right. I think it's a very good point, and I kind of thought of a similar thing when it comes to oh, I can't get banana bread, but I can engage in conversation. Right. And again, the nice thing is that it's really driven by value, things you value, the things that another person values to talk about or cares to talk about, and therefore it ends up being such a mutually beneficial thing, right? It's a value exchange, just like somebody dropping off banana bread would be kind of its own type of value exchange. And in some ways, it's even more to the very soul of the person and, you know, of the people involved in that conversation. So yeah, I mean, I think there's something, and like you said, it's funny, it also makes me think of, like, there's something even almost more, like, while there may be some more performative things on Zoom chats and talks and YouTube talks and stuff like that, there is just in the sense of communicating with somebody in a digital realm, it's actually, like, in some ways has less formalities sometimes, in the sense that, like, you don't have to, like you said, you don't have to arrange to come over to their house. You don't have to you can just say, hey, like, you know, you just talk, and if they're there, they talk, you know.
That's
and
right.
so in that way, there's something that is unique about it that actually requires less formalities, like, yes, for some things it takes more planning, but for a lot of other things it takes less planning. So it's kind of just a different situation of that, right, than it would be in the shared physical spaces.
Yeah, well, there's a few things, like, the other thing that happens where, in the past, like, you know, if you're having someone come to your house, like, it can logistically be a big deal. You have to get food, you have to do all these different things, and if a person can't make it, then it can be, like, really like an issue. Whereas, like, online, if suddenly something comes up and someone can't make it, it's not really a big deal, right? So it's kind of interesting as well. Like, there's just pluses and minuses where you can say, well, that's why it's more arbitrary and less meaningful. Yeah, but then it also has a certain flexibility that can be really important. I think, frankly, like, when you have family and kids and, you know, you're working on different things, like, that flexibility is really, really important. Because you just don't know what the kids are going to need or what the kids are going to be doing or things like that. Where, say, if you're younger and you're going out to a restaurant or you're meeting up with someone like that, if suddenly they can't make it, you know, it's a big deal, but it's not a huge deal. Whereas if you're also coordinating children, it can be, like, a really, really big deal because it takes so much to get everything together. And then it's just harder to do more often, right, because of the logistical size. But with the online space, precisely in the logistical challenges being so much less, like, even just the ability to, say, turn off the Zoom camera if suddenly, you know, a kid needs something, or to turn, like, mute. Like, these are little big deals that I do think the digital actually can actually allow for adult relationships in ways that in the past were not so easy. Now, look, if you want to get back to, like, all the way back to the early 20th century where the women are washing clothes down at the river, you know, as you mentioned, like, there's that communing together in those different ways. Well, then that has been lost. But then you almost had this kind of wasteland almost after World War II where adult relationships, you know, capitalism, suburbia, people weren't working together and they weren't hanging together just because of their daily tasks out in the farm field or something like that. And so maybe there's a way to look at Zoom as kind of dealing with that problem that has emerged to create a lower logistical barrier that can help adults regain relationships where that's proven. I mean, look, you can read books like Lost Connections or obviously Robert Putnam, all these different people that just show the lack of social engagement that has occurred. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Putnam talks about TV. You don't have Lions Club, bowling alley. People are busy. You know, well, frankly, the cost of living has skyrocketed. You know, it used to be you could have one income for take care of 7 kids, and now people are both adults are working for 1 kid. Well, that automatically right there limits your time because you're having to use more time to make money. So that changed it. So there is one side of it where the logistical ease of Zoom really opened some doors for a lot of people, especially in the middle years, who otherwise would not have those doors opened.
Right.
And I think that's something of note. So although we can often think digital takes away from the real, there are things that it opens up that are not possible in the real, that we can act like, oh, it's taking away from the real, but really the logistical challenges are so high that you can't really engage as regularly or as easily as that can make it sound like you can.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Playing met.
Yeah, I mean, I think, too, when we talk about a sense of, like, belonging and feeling, there also can feel like a sense of, I think that word can also...
Mommy.
Yeah.
Okay, whoa.
I think that when we talk about belonging again as well, we also feel like there can be a way in which the desire for belonging or a sense of not knowing how to get our bearings of belonging in a digital age. It can also have to do with the fact that we may feel like rather alone in very big transitional steps of our lives.
Right.
And perhaps that is just something to kind of bear through, like, you know, to just bear with. And but it can feel strange because it is difficult. Like if you haven't, it always can just feel reassuring to have somebody say like, hey, I've been through that, and you know, it's going to be okay, or I know that's scary, but this is how I navigated it, blah blah blah. And it's hard with this day and age where we don't, that's not always available or per the particular circumstance because of the international quality of such transitions, right? Of being in different places and such. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, in that sense, it may have to do a lot with feeling that sort of kind of existential loneliness in the sense that you don't have the support through those transitions. You know, it's kind of similar with the idea of like losing rites of passage, but now we don't even, like, even if you are trying to navigate and pioneer your own rites of passage as an adult, then you're kind of alone in it.
Well,
and it used to be the case that you would have such a support through those giant transitions and huge things that are often quite, there's a lot of trepidation around them.
Well, that's part of the sociological loss of givens.
Yes, exactly.
Like that, and once you lose that, then you open to existentialism.
Yeah.
And existentialism makes totalitarianism appealing.
Right.
You know, that's kind of why the sociological problem of givens is dire.
Right.
And maybe, you know, at the end of the day, as we look ahead to, you know, as you look at the address, you know, one of the things suggested is that it could easily be a multitude of different addresses for different personality types, where, say, maybe the online spaces create an address for idea people. Maybe there are different decentralized working structures with new pricing mechanisms that can help more entrepreneurial type that aren't into a philosophy. Like, you could have a toolbox of different sociological arrangements for different personality types, which might ultimately prove better than the classical source of givens that gave belonging, that then could lead into the banality of evil, race hierarchy, all these different things that define world history, right? So the belonging again could entail a multiplicity. But the key is, like, right now, if we're thinking to lose, the multiplicity is located on the individual. Like, what we're talking about is sociological multiplicities, and that could be part of it. Now, of course, that leads us into having to really examine the debates between, say, the states, the Union, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution, because America is arguably defined by this debate, and that's where, you know, things like the Revolution, the Civil War, the Federalist Paper, all of those can be extremely useful for this conversation. And that, because, you know, the Articles of Confederation, the problem with those is they were too decentralized, and it led to all sorts of troubles. Like, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of conservatives defend the Constitution in terms of individual rights, but at the time it was radically centralizing. You know, it had a strong centralizing edge. So there's questions there about that. And so I think looking to American history would be important.
Well, I think too, you know, especially when you have when you kind of are starting to make more roots, you know, whether that's in starting a family or things like that. I mean, any time that you're building relationships, you know, it's not just you, right? And it's never really ever just been an individual. Like, there's always the nexus of other individuals that it will impact and that it could impact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it does make it. I think to be honest, like it can be a bit more difficult to take the Deleuzian option when you're going to have when you're going to maybe do certain things or make certain choices that then make you have more, responsibilities to more other people. Like, you always do have that, and you will have that through your job or your school or just people you know. But it does kind of it's quite a. It's especially like, I just think about it with being a parent. Like, you have literally children that rely on you, and rely on you for their survival and their thriving. And so it's a lot of, it's like the whole idea that it's not just your life, which is true for every single person actually, it kind of ups the ante on what that really means on a daily basis. And so...
Well, the more,
Yeah.
I mean, the more like, if you are taking care of children, then you probably need help from the community, or you're relying on stores to go find goods or whatever. Well...
Or like getting a plane ticket for you and all your children.
Yeah,
like
that's
it's
right.
totally different. You know,
Ball
it could be a different ball game.
Yeah, and if
because
there's an
of
emphasis,
that.
and if there's an emphasis in Deleuze, Deleuze will talk a lot about imperceptibility, right? Well, you can only be so imperceptible in your community if you're going to negotiate like social arrangements with them to take care of families and community and things like that, right? Yeah, so I mean, the moment you talk about imperceptibility, which, don't get me wrong, Deleuze is quite astute in the role of imperceptibility and avoiding capture by the state or control societies or different things like that. But the issue is, imperceptibility is precisely, if you're going to have community and negotiation working together to figure things out, you can't be imperceptible to one another. You have to be intelligible to one another, right? Now, this is why I think Justin Murphy is correct when he says in Deleuze, you're to be imperceptible but not obscure. And this kind of idea that Deleuze is saying everyone should be obscure and chaotic is not what he's saying. He's saying be imperceptible. The issue is like, well, what does that mean? Like, well, how can you tell the difference between those things? And the more and more sophisticated capitalism becomes, especially with, say, AI technologies, then you're basically going to have to be radically obscure not to be captured. Being imperceptible, well, AI will perceive you in a heartbeat. Just give them a day or two. They'll learn how you do things. So, like, that is going to almost... in order to be effective, is going to lead increasingly more and more toward obscurity. I think what Deleuze is saying, although I think theoretically he's correct in that it will gradually be more difficult for imperceptibility not to be obscurity. Yeah, so the line between imperceptibility and obscurity is going to be harder and harder to hold apart. And the key also to the whole issue is when we look at an Eric Fromm or all the sociologists, is if everyone, the whole cause of the existential tension is when the people who are radically different than you, which makes you existentially reflect on your own choices and then overwhelms you. Like, if your neighbors are all Christian, then you don't wonder if Christianity is true, but if your neighbor is Hindu, then you go, wait a minute, why am I Christian? And so the very experience of difference is what makes you existentially reflect. And so if everyone is imperceptible, well, by definition, they're not the same in their imperceptibility. So you have that existential tension, therefore you will not have the feeling of belonging. So Deleuze, by definition, even though it works against state capture, individualizes. Now, in individualizing, you're not going to have Nazism, but you're also not going to have a social order. And in that collapse of the social order, well, then totalitarianism becomes appealing, right? And you see, as you become an adult and as you're having to work, or you're responsible for things, just like taking care of the pipes. Well, you need someone who knows how to take care of the pipes. You need to go to the store. You need to know how to do things. Well, then you have to relate. And the moment you relate, if the people you relate to are different from you radically, then that causes existential reflection. But in the past, if the plumber was Christian, the guy at Lowe's was Christian, if everyone you're interacting with is of the same ideological structure, it doesn't cause the existential reflection. So it's just that what ends up happening is, as you get older and you encounter difference, you realize the Deleuzian solution. I mean, don't get me wrong, people should not, be overwhelmed when they encounter difference, right? There is part of belonging, again, will say that a lot of the problems does seem to be almost a conservative temper tantrum, right? But that temper tantrum of encountering difference is real, and people do turn to fascism and totalitarianism. And if you don't want to occur, well, then you have to change the subjectivity of the average person. And that gets into the issue of scale and spread, right? So, that doesn't go away. It does. If you say everyone needs to be more existentially tolerant of difference, well, then you're talking about a problem of spread. Right? And then how do you do that? Well, maybe you need the internet. Maybe you need more people doing these online communities, right? But that, I think basically to your point, is that the more and more you have responsibilities or have children, the more and more you must interact with other people. And on terms not of your choosing, mind you. Like, you don't choose the terms of the interaction. So you can't just hang out with other Deleuzians, right? You have to hang out with different people and therefore be intelligible to them as they are intelligible to you. So then the Deleuzian route does certainly feel more individual.
Yeah, there does seem to be, like you were saying, that the question of scale is huge. And maybe it's also just about thinking from the perspective of recognizing sort of like what is the kind of I don't think it's necessarily going to be balance per se, but what is the kind of ability to make the most of the fact that we kind of live with the digital and the physical,
right.
You know, and maybe just sort of going into what does that look like in different seasons. You know, for some people it might look like doing more physical things and, you know, workshops and, like, you know, there's a lot of great opportunities for meeting up with people and doing that sort of work and that sort of thing. But then there's also the digital space, which, you know, it can be great as well and have a lot of opportunities there. So just kind of being aware of, like, wait, is this, that's kind of the beauty and uniqueness of the situation, is like it's never like it's mutually exclusive, right? I mean, you can make it, you know, you can let one suck you away into one versus the other, but if you see a value in like having digital relations, then you can also just sort of pair that well with like having your own physical space of relationships. And yeah, I mean, it also could look like, maybe that may look like traveling more, you know, it just really depends on the situation. But yeah, I think it does feel like sometimes it would be great if there could be kind of more like a pool of resources for the digital community to be able to like actually meet in physical spaces more often or something like that. Like, I think about that a lot. But I guess I don't even know how that would necessarily look like or what that could be like. But yeah, until that, then it's sort of just navigating, okay, you know what, I really want to kind of sink myself more into where I am geolocationally, or I want to kind of put more time into the digital communities because I'm really kind of, that's really been more beneficial, or blah, blah, blah. So it's just sort of, you know, kind of tailoring that to your own experience, since we are, as like, you know, individual subjects navigating this type of moment where we have the digital and the physical.
It is pretty.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, well, I mean, it comes down to a question of a lot of these people you're meeting online, you would never meet otherwise.
Yeah.
So would it really be better? Like, if you didn't have the feeling of, oh, I've never seen them in person, that would mean you didn't know about them. So would that really be better, right? It's all trade-offs. And then there are people who you can even, like, the very possibility of knowing them means the possibility of seeing them, right? I think there's a few other things. I would not be surprised if, because of the online spaces, the feeling that defines so many movies of, I'm going to get out of this small town, or I'm going to get out, you know, that's going to go away, because people seem like they want to go to small towns because you can go there and still have connection with culture.
Maybe you connect with someone in China, or if you're in China, someone in America.
Yep.
Or if you're in America, someone in, well, who knows where.
Yeah, exactly. And then otherwise you never would. And, you know, you have access to learning, thought, culture, etc., so forth, that before you may not have so easily. And so then there's a possibility of getting the best of both worlds, where otherwise there really was more of a kind of monopoly of cities, frankly, on culture, ideas, and things like that. And there really can be a sense in where the internet breaks up that monopoly that cities had. That opens up a lot of doors that otherwise, you know, wasn't opened up. And that may work against, you know, Charles Murray and Coming Apart talks about the brain drain, where all these small towns, you know, everyone goes and lives in New York or where the colleges are, and they lose, you know, the leaders of the community are gone. Well, that may change, right? I think also the access to those people can indeed give nourishment for people to be in those areas and not feel like existent. Like the price of the loss of belonging that comes, you know, partly because of the internet.
Yeah.
Precisely is then the possibility of receiving an intellectual nourishment that before you wouldn't have gotten. That then maybe you didn't have existential instability, but you felt trapped. You know, because the feeling of being trapped, or, you know, not, you know, behind or like disconnected from everything, is not the same as an existential anxiety. And so, you know, it's all trade-offs, right, at the end of the day. So I definitely think there's probably a decline of the feeling of being trapped. There's probably a working against the city monopoly on culture ideas and things like that. That's all positive. And I mean, the other thing too is like, there's a lot of people whom don't feel like they know someone unless they know their ideas. And those people are probably minority. And the chances of them being around other people who like talking about ideas to thus feel like they really know anyone was quite low. Well, now online, those people can access other people who feel the same way much easier, and thus address what was before a pretty dire feeling of social alienation.
Right.
Can now be addressed because those people can, actually find other people who agree with the feeling that you only know someone if you know their ideas, which has always been a minority.
Right.
And so, those are, I think of perhaps thinking of the online communities more like online dinners or something, online meals, like online sources of nourishment, online gardens might be better language. Because if we call them communities, well, one, the irony is when you focus on community, you don't get community. But instead, if you think of it in terms of a kind of nourishment or food, well, then the community follows from that naturally, because it's not your primary concern. And then it's like it's a nourishment. So then, of course, it positively benefits your real life, if you will, because you receive that energy and you don't have the same feeling of entrapment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think that's very good, Daniel. I think that's spot on. And I mean, I think ultimately it sort of points to the fact that there's a lot of that it's trade-offs. We can, when we get reflective about what's kind of happening now and what are the options, then I think we can make the most of it, and that's the best thing that we can do, and it really is a gift that we can do that.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the question of belonging, again, like we stress, is the again.
Yeah.
Like, this is,
again.
the again. And the question of, as the part 2 we'll talk about, it's like, what does it mean to move from givens to gifts? And commitments as opposed to kind of sociological backgrounds. And I think that's going to get into like being gifts for one another is going to have a lot to do with changes in the subjectivity, skills, things that you can offer other people. And maybe there's a way in which the internet here is suggesting the possibility of a society of gift giving as opposed to givens. But what that means would require a book.
Yeah.
Gifts don't really impact your life. They impact the way you take in your life because you have more opportunities, which basically gives you more opportunities for your life. So it's kind of a circle. But then how does that go into belonging? It kind of switches from belonging again to gifts. How does this correspond?
Well, you could find belonging in giving gifts, of being a person.
I belong to be a gift giver. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Or you could, like, the feeling of belonging that somebody can give you with their love and their acceptance can be a gift.
Yeah,
and
and
feel
someone
like
giving
belong
you a
with them.
gift can make you feel belonging.
And vice versa.
Yeah. But back on the first book, belonging again. Again is the main part, yeah. Just like my dad said. And why is it belonging again? Probably because he wants to catch on the subject that how do you belong a second time in a place where you feel like you belong in one place and not another? How do you belong a second time? Because you belonged in that place. How do you change your belonging? Would you maybe have to change that first belonging? So the first belonging you don't think you belong in anymore, right? But again kind of takes away the belonging. Because, like, you belonged again, but then you took away some of the other belonging to make a new belonging. Kind of like rebirth.
Exactly. That's exactly the problem. Like, what does it mean to belong again? Because to belong again means you lost it. So what does it mean to regain it? Because it has to be by new conditions. Like, because the first conditions no longer apply. So that means we have to learn a new way to gain belonging or to think about belonging.
Yeah, so with that belonging again stuff, I'm going to pass it over to Mom now.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you,
Thank you, Haven.
Appreciated that.
One.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you, Grace.
Hey, Mommy. Go one again.
Belonging again.
Belonging again.
Reed.
Thank you, Rita. I appreciate it. Well, for more, by O.G. Rose and Haven
Yes, Haven.
and Reed.
Reed.
You say Reed.
Reed.
And Grace.
And Grace.
You say hi, Grace.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for more by OG Rose.
Haven.
Haman.
Read.
Yeah.
Say read.
Keep.
Grace.
Please visit our website.
Website.
Yes, website.
OGRose.com.
www.ogrose.com.
YouTube, Instagram, Substack.
Haman.
The book is on Amazon. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.